Okay, I think we'll start. So last week we saw that for any beta, we introduced the pressure, we proved existence and convexity of the pressure, and then we started to investigate what were the consequences of this convexity on the magnetization density. And we introduced for any beta non-negative, we introduced a set B beta, which was the set of all values of H, at which the pressure was not differentiable, say at which the right and left derivative of the pressure, which always exist by convexity, say beta H, did not coincide. And we saw that this set is also precisely the set of all value of H at which the magnetization density, seen as a function, okay, is discontinuous. Or say, this function as a function of H is discontinuous at H. Okay, so from this point of view, it's very natural to identify phase transition or first order phase transition with the set B beta. So that will be definition 312. Yes, 312. We say that the pressure exhibits a first order phase transition at beta H if the function, if the pressure seen as a function of H is non-differentiable at H. Okay. Is not differentiable at H. In other words, the same as if H belongs to the set B beta. Okay, so that's the first definition of a first order phase transition. We will see another definition of a first order phase transition, which is this is a more analytic definition. We will see a more probabilistic definition later, maybe today, maybe next week. And we'll see the relationship between these two definitions of phase transition next week, I guess. Okay, so now our goal is to understand what this set B beta is really for different possible values of beta. So our goal from now on is to prove that for any dimension 2 or larger, there exists a non-trivial value beta c such that B beta is reduced to 1 point, which is 0, if beta is larger than beta c. And it is the empty set if beta is smaller than beta c. Okay, so that's what we are going to do from now on in this chapter. And to do that, I need another notion, which is the notion of infinite volume Gibbs state. Okay, so last week we saw how we could take the thermodynamic limit of the pressure. So we were considering the pressure in finite volume, then taking larger and larger volumes and seeing what kind of function we get in the end. We are going to do something similar today, but not at the level of a function like the pressure, but at the level of the Gibbs distributions themselves. So we have these probability measures in finite volume, and you want to take, in a sense, the limit of these probability measures. Okay, I will not actually work directly with limit of probability measures because this would force us to do much more abstract mathematics, to do a lot of functional analysis and things like that. I would like to avoid it as much as possible. For those who want to see how this works, the whole chapter 6 in the book is about this kind of things. But I will not do this here, so I will avoid it by working with a notion of suitable notion of state, as you will see. Okay, so this notion of infinite volume Gibbs states, it's constructed starting from some particular set of observables, some functions defined on configurations, which are the local observable or local functions. Okay. It's definition 319. Let's say the function f from omega to r is local. Okay, in words, if it only depends on finitely many spins. So the values of the configuration at finitely many vertices. So one way to formulate this is to say that f is local if there exists a finite set A in ZD such that f de omega is equal to f of omega prime as soon as omega I is equal to omega prime I for all I in A. So if you have two configurations which coincide on the finite set A, then the function f takes the same value in the two configurations. Okay, so the function f only depends on what happens on the set A. Now, the smallest such set A, the smallest such set A is called the support of f. And is denoted by sup f. Okay, so that will be a notion that is important for us. Notion of local function corresponds to making a local measurement, if you want, on your system. Okay. So now I can define the notion of state. So state is a map which, say, I will denote like that, which acts on local function okay, and with which satisfies the following three properties: satisfying the following properties. So the first one, it's normalized in the sense that the map, if I apply the map to the constant function 1, so that's a function which is equal to 1 for all configuration omega, just 1, this gives you 1. Second is that this functional here is non-negative. So if I have a non-negative function f, then the value which is associated to this function f is also non-negative. And the third is that it's linear. So if lambda is, say, for any real number lambda, I have that f plus lambda g is f plus lambda g. Okay. So any functional defined on local function which satisfies this three property I will call a state. And we will be particularly interested in one particular class of states, which are the so-called Gibbs states, which can be defined as follows. So let's say, so we say that a sequence, let me do it this way. So let's consider a sequence of finite subsets of ZD, which increases to ZD. Let's also consider a sequence of boundary condition. Then the sequence mu. So I'm looking at a sequence of finite volume Gibbs distributions defined on the box lambda n, parameters beta and h with boundary condition given by this. Okay. This sequence of Gibbs distribution is said to converge to the state, to this state, if converges to the state if the following is true. So if the expectation of all local functions f under the finite volume Gibbs state converges to the corresponding value under the state. Let me call this the average of f in this state. Okay, so I want the expectation value of f under the finite volume Gibbs distribution. That's just a sequence of real numbers now. This has to converge to the corresponding values in the state. So this has to hold for all f local. Okay. Then if such a thing happens, if you can find such a sequence of finite volume Gibbs distribution which converges to a state, then the limiting state is called the Gibbs state. So it's a particular state which has the property that it can be obtained as the limit of finite volume, expectation finite volume Gibbs distribution. Okay. So this notion is very natural from a mathematical point of view, even though it might not be completely obvious at this stage. The reason is that, let me just mention it, but I don't want to say more about it. You can read chapter 6 if you want. So as soon as you have a functional which has these properties, you can prove that there exists an underlying probability measure, mu, such that the average of f is in fact equal to the expectation of f under say with respect to the corresponding probability measure mu. So this is always true. And then this notion which is given here, it's really just can be reformulated as the weak convergence of these measures to the measure mu. Okay. Okay. So it's really, this is just the classical notion of weak convergence in this setting. But I don't want to discuss these things because it would lead us to more abstract matters which are not very relevant for what we want to do in this chapter. But this is done in chapter 6 if you want, and much more than that is done in chapter 6. Okay. What I would like to do is to explain to you why this is a very natural notion from the physical point of view, because it's much more relevant to, it's a course in mathematical physics, so why is it relevant as a physical definition? The reason is the following. So let's say you are modeling some real substance. So we want to model, say, iron with statistical mechanics. So if you take an encyclopedia and you look at the properties of iron, okay, if you open at the right page, you will have all the properties of, all the thermodynamical properties of this material, and nowhere it will be said that, okay, if your piece of iron is a sphere of radius 1 centimeter, then the values are this and that. If it's a cube of 10 centimeters of side length, then the values are this and that. Of course, the shape of your system of your piece of iron has absolutely no impact on its thermodynamical properties. Okay? So you would like to give a mathematical sense to this notion. And one way to do that is exactly this definition, because say that's your piece of iron, that's your sample. So here we are not looking at a piece of iron, we are looking at a piece of Ising model, but it's the same thing. Okay, we are modeling something. We have a finite sample, huge finite sample, and we want to make some local measurement. Here, which is modeled by, I have some local function f, of which I want to compute, say, the expectation. And this local function f is located far inside your sample. So the distance here, r, is very large. Then what you would like to say is that, okay, my system is of course finite, so I have a lambda n. Okay, let me say lambda. So I have some sample which is modeled by a subset lambda of ZD. It has some boundary condition, which I don't control, some boundary condition here. But what I would like to say is that the properties that I observe here far away from the boundary of the system, they are universal, just given by something which depends neither on the box lambda nor on the boundary condition, plus some small error. And this small error, it's vanishing, it's going to 0 as lambda goes to ZD. And that's exactly what we are doing here. Okay, when such a convergence takes place, we are saying that as soon as n is large enough, this quantity gets as well approximated as I want by the limiting average under the state. Okay, so that's one way of implementing mathematically this thing which we want, the fact that if we measure a property far away from the boundary, it should not depend on the shape of the sample, it should not depend on the boundary condition. We saw something similar last week what we saw is that the pressure, which also a priori is depending on the shape of your sample and on the boundary condition, actually was given by something which is universal plus a small error. And this small error last week was vanishing as lambda tended to ZD in the sense of Van Hove. Okay, but it was the same. We were able to extract some universal quantity out of it, which depend neither on the shape of the sample nor on the boundary condition. And the same was also true for the magnetization. But this, let me put beta h because here it's relevant. This was true again, so the error was again vanishing when lambda was going to ZD in the sense of Van Hove. But this was only valid for h, not in b beta. So when, in the absence of phase transition, you also had a similar result for the magnetization. Okay? Sorry? Exactly. So here in this picture, I'm looking at local function. And then in this case, for local function, you only need that lambda is going to ZD, that you send the boundary sufficiently far away, and then the effect of the boundary should get weaker and weaker. Okay, that's one thing. Here, these two functions, they are not local, they are dependent on the whole sample. Okay? That's why you need a much stronger notion of convergence here to be able to say something. Okay? But still, for these two functions, you have a similar result under these stronger assumptions. Okay? Okay, so that was for the motivation. So now a very basic question is, okay, from this definition, it's not clear that a Gibbs state exists at all. Is it possible to always construct a Gibbs state for the Ising model? So that's the question we want to investigate now. So question, do Gibbs state exist? Okay. So that's the answer to this question is theorem 325. Okay. And I'll state it this way. So let beta, non-negative, H is some real number. Then there exist two states, which I will denote like that, such that, let's say, or let me write it this way, plus lambda beta H minus. Okay. When I write this, I'm really saying that the expectation of any local function under this Gibbs distribution, finite volume Gibbs distribution, converges to the corresponding average under the limiting state. And this is the same for the minus boundary condition. If you want, still once I will do it, but after that, I will just write it as I wrote before. Okay. So there exist two states denoted like that, such that this sequences converges along, say, for all sequence of lambda which goes to ZD, which increases to ZD independently. These states are given, and for any sequence of lambda which increases to ZD, these two expectations converge. So in particular, the limit do not depend on the sequence lambda. Okay. So these are of course Gibbs states because they are states which are limit of finite volume expectations. Okay. So you always have at least two. Okay. You have always. I'm not saying that these two states are different. So let me just maybe mention that explicitly. So this theorem does not claim that the two Gibbs states with plus and minus boundary conditions. So these are called these two. This is the plus state, and this is the minus state. And the theorem is not claiming that the plus state and the minus state are different. They could very well correspond to exactly the same functional. So it's totally possible that the expectation of a local function f under this state is always equal to the corresponding average under this state. Okay, that's not the content of the theorem, but there exist these two states. Maybe it's the same state, and they are limit of these finite volume Gibbs distributions. Okay, so remark: the theorem does not imply that and determining for which beta h this equality occurs or not will be one of the main things we will have to study. Okay, this will be an important thing. Okay, I would like to say one more thing about these two states, plus and minus. They are translation invariant. So I have not yet defined what that means for a state, but I will say it in a second. Are translation invariant. Okay, so let me define what this means. So in the notes, it's definition 324. So let me define translation de lattice. So I will denote by theta j an application will go from ZD to ZD, and which sends I to I plus j. So the translation by j. Okay. Then I can make this translation operation, which is acting on the lattice. I can make it act on the set omega of configurations. So we write theta j omega at vertex I, this will just be, by definition, this will be omega theta minus ji, which is omega of I minus j. Okay? So I have a translation. Here I'm translating by the lattice by j, and when I'm acting with theta j on the configuration omega, I'm taking my configuration omega, I'm translating it by minus j, if you want. Okay? Now, a state is translation invariant if the expectation of f, the average of f under this state, is the same as the average of f composed with theta j. So that's for all f local and for all j in ZD. Okay. So the way you should understand this definition, it's a very obvious definition. If I take a local function f and I compute its average here, I get some value. If I translate this function here and I compute its average here, then I get the same value. So that's what it means to be translation invariant for a state. Okay. Then the claim is that the state you obtain with plus and minus boundary condition, they are translation invariant in this sense. Okay, so I will not prove immediately this theorem 325. I need some tools before I can prove it. So let me introduce the necessary tools. And we'll probably prove it only next week, or maybe at the end of the second hour today. We'll see. So first tool I need is the following. So two families of local functions. If I want to prove that, the sequence of finite volume Gibbs distribution converge to some state, limiting state, what I have to do, as we have seen a few minutes ago, I need to show that the expectation of f converges to the corresponding average of f under the limiting state for all local function f. There are a lot of local function f. It would be very convenient if we could find a smaller class of local functions for which proving this convergence for this smaller class is enough to ensure that the convergence holds for all the local functions. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do. I will give you two families of functions, of local functions, which generate all possible local functions so that it will be enough to prove the convergence for these two families, or for one of the two families. So the two families are the following one. So remember that sigma I was the spin at I. Okay, spin at I is the random variable which gives you the value of the configuration at I. Okay. Then I can define what we call the occupation variable, Ni. And I is just a change of variable, if you want, compared to sigma I. And I is defined as, so let me do it correctly. I want sigma I plus 1 over 2. Okay. So we have that Ni is equal to 1 if omega I is equal to 1, is equal to 0 if omega I is equal to minus 1. Okay, so instead of taking value plus and minus 1, take value 1 or 0. Okay, it's just another way of writing the spin. And then I define two families of such a function constructed from these two random variables. So for any finite subset A in ZD, I denote by sigma sub A. It's the product over I in A, sigma I, product of the spin in the set A, and NA is the product over I in A of Ni. Okay? Now I claim that these two families, so sigma A for all finite A, or NA for all finite A, they generate all local functions. And this is the content of the next result. And it's lemma 328. So let me see how I wrote the coefficients. Hat and tilde. So let f be a local function. Then there exists a family of coefficients f at A. So f at A, they are indexed by subsets of the support of f, and f tilde A, which are also indexed by subsets of the support of the function f, okay, such that f can be written as the sum over A in the support of f, f at A sigma A. It can also be written as the sum over A in the support of f tilde A and A. Okay. So this shows that if you control these functions, this family or this family, then I can decompose any local function on the corresponding family. Okay. So let me prove that. It's pretty easy. Proof. Okay. So I make the following claim, which I will prove in a couple of minutes, but let's assume this claim for a moment. I claim that for any A, let me do it this way. So for any B in ZB, for any configuration omega tilde, we have that the sum, so it will be a 2 to the power minus B, sum over A in B of, and I will write it like that, sigma A of omega sigma A of omega tilde. This is equal to the indicator that omega I is equal to omega tilde I for all I in B. It's a kind of, we are saying that this family of functions, they are orthonormal in a sense. Right? Okay, so that's a claim that we will assume to hold for a moment. Let's assume that this is fine, this is true, and let's see that it implies the claim, and then we will prove the claim. Okay, so the claim implies the desired decompositions. Let's do it. It's very easy because what you can do, so you have f, say f of omega. F of omega, I can certainly write it as the sum over all omega tilde in omega, say, support of f. F omega tilde, indicator that omega tilde I is equal to omega I for all I in the support of f. Okay, I'm not doing anything because I'm saying that, okay, if I want to compute f of omega, it's sum over all possible value of the configuration in the support of f. F only depends on what happens on its support. Okay, so summing over the configuration there. And I compute f of omega tilde, but I only keep the contribution in the sum if omega tilde is the same as omega. Okay, so actually, of course, here I just have f of omega on both sides. Okay, so that's certainly true. And now what I can do is that I can use the claim to replace this indicator here by the corresponding expression here. So by the claim, this is 2 to the power minus the cardinality of the support of f, sum over all a in f, in the support of f, sigma a of omega, sigma a of omega tilde. Okay, just using the claim. Good. Now, let me just reorder all these things. So I will, maybe I need a bit more room. So I will first sum over A. Remember that I want to arrive at this formula. Okay, I want to write f as a sum over A in the support of f of something. So sum over A in the support of f, that starts well. Then I will get something, which we'll see what it is in a second. And then I would like to have sigma A of omega. Okay, that's exactly the kind of thing I want. And let's see what happens. So I need this 2 to the power minus sup f. Okay, I've taken this. I need to take this sum over omega tilde. Okay, f of omega tilde, sigma a of omega tilde. And that's all. Okay, so now this thing, I will call it f at a. Okay. Just some number depends on a. Okay, so we have proved the first identity here with an explicit formula for the coefficients. Now to prove the second one, it's almost immediate. So to prove the second decomposition, just use the fact that sigma a is, by definition, we said product over I in A sigma I. This is product over I in A, and we saw that, is it still there here? There is a simple relation between sigma and n, so sigma I is just 2ni minus 1. And then I can just expand this product. If I expand this product, I get sum over, say, b in A, 2 to the power b, minus 1 to the power a minus b, and nb. Okay, so just expanding the product. And then what you have, if you replace each of the sigma a by this expression, you get a linear combination of objects of the form nb, okay, which gives you exactly what you want. Okay, so the only thing I need to prove is the claim, which is here. So let me prove the claim. So there are two cases. I want to show this claim, and I can do it in two parts. I can first assume that the condition here in the indicator is satisfied. So the left-hand side and the right-hand side is 1. I have to show that the left-hand side is 1. So let's do this first. So suppose that omega I is equal to omega tilde I for all I in B. Okay? Then this implies that the right-hand side is equal to 1. And now let's see what the left-hand side is. We get 2 to the power minus b, sum over a in b, sigma a of omega tilde. So this is just omega a, that's omega tilde a. By this I mean really as usual, so it's the product over I in a of omega I, product over I in a of omega tilde I. Okay. So that's 2 to the power minus b, sum a in b, and this I can write, as I said, product over I in a omega tilde I. Okay. But now omega I is equal to omega tilde I on all of B. So A is a subset of B. So this product is actually equal to omega I squared. And this is 1 always. So this product is always equal to 1. So that's the sum of our subsets of A of B of 1. So it's just the number of subsets A of B. So how many subsets of B do I have? I have 2 to the power B subsets. And 2 to the power B cancel with 2 to the power minus B, and this is indeed 1. So I get that the left-hand side is also 1, and this is proved in the first case. So now the second case is when the condition is not satisfied, so I get a 0 on the right-hand side. Let's see, so second case, there exists J in B such that omega J is different from omega tilde J, which means that the product omega tilde J is equal to -1. Because if they don't agree, one of the two is equal to 1 and the other is equal to -1, so their product is -1. Okay, so now things are very easy. So the right-hand side is equal to 0 and the left-hand side. So we want to show that the left-hand side is also 0. So to prove that the left-hand side is 0, it's enough to prove that this sum is 0. So let me do it. So we have sum over A in B. Let me write it like that. Omega A, omega tilde A. Okay, this I can write as follows. So I can write it as sum over all A which are in B minus J. So I'm taking all subsets of B which do not contain J. And I write this in this way. So I have omega A, omega tilde A. So this first sum gives me all the contribution to this sum here where A does not contain J. But I can also add omega A union J, omega tilde A union J. And then this second sum here gives me the contribution to this sum for all subsets of B which contains J. And now the only thing to observe is that this here is just equal to omega J, omega tilde J, omega A, omega tilde A. It's just the same. Okay? But omega I, omega J, omega tilde J, it's -1. So you get omega A, omega tilde A minus omega A, omega tilde A. So this is just equal to 0. So this is equal to 0. And the right and left-hand side is also 0. This proves the claim, and thus it proves the lemma. Okay, so we have now these two families of local functions. And the reason they are so useful is not only that you can expand every local function on these two families in a linear way, but that one has very good tools to study these two families of local functions. And these tools are correlation inequalities, which I will introduce now. So correlation inequalities, it's section 3.6. There is an infinite number of correlation inequalities for the Ising model. That's one of the reasons why it's so tractable, inequalities. I will only introduce two of them, which are the most important two inequalities. There is the FKG inequality that you have already seen in another context in the course by Hugo, and the Griffiths inequalities, GKS inequalities, that I will introduce here, that you will also see in Hugo's course later. Okay, to do that, I want to take a slightly more general setting than we usually consider in this course. So I want to consider the slightly more general class of Hamiltonian. Which I will denote H, lambda. So lambda is as usual a finite subset of ZD. J, so J is a collection of real numbers, Jij, indexed by edges of the lattice, real numbers. And H is also a family, Hi, I in lambda, of real numbers. Okay. And then I want to define the corresponding Hamiltonian as follows. So it will be, instead of minus beta times the sum of sigma I, sigma j, I will take minus the sum of gij sigma I, sigma j, minus the sum, instead of having h times the sum of sigma I want to let h depend on I, hi sigma I. It will be convenient. This slightly more general form, we will never use it for our results. In our results, we will always take jij equal to beta for all ij, nearest neighbor, and hi is always constantly equal to h. But it's useful when you use these inequalities to have these additional degrees of freedom. Okay. So that will be the setting we will consider, and I will state these inequalities after the break. So we start at 1:15. Okay, we'll start. So I told you I want to introduce two kinds of correlation inequalities. Let's start with the first one. It's the GKS inequalities. And the corresponding claim is theorem 329. Okay. So I'm always in this setting, explained here. So let's assume, so we have these two collections of real numbers, J and H, so the coupling constant and the magnetic field. And I'm assuming that these two collections of real numbers are actually collection of non-negative real numbers. Be non-negative. It's crucial, otherwise inequality is just not true in general. Okay. Then, maybe let lambda be a finite subset of ZD. I think that's right. Then we have that there are two inequalities. That's the first Griffiths inequality. It says that the expectation of sigma A in lambda J H with plus boundary condition, this is always non-negative. And the second one tells you that these random variables, sigma A and sigma B, if I take A and B to subsets of lambda, they are positively correlated, sigma A, sigma B, under the same measure with plus boundary condition. This is bigger than sigma A plus lambda beta, JH, sigma B plus lambda JH. Okay, that's for all A and B and lambda. Okay, so that's the Griffiths inequalities, the GKS inequalities, first and second GKS inequalities. And I stated them for the plus boundary condition, but they also hold for the free boundary condition. So the same is also true for free boundary condition. But I don't think I will ever use them. Okay, I'll just use that. So that's the GKS. And let me state the FKG inequalities.
The non-negative hypothesis, it's required for both inequalities or just one of the two?
For both. Sorry. Maybe to get an understanding of what these inequalities mean, let me just state an exercise. I don't know if it has a number. Let me just check. Yes, 330. Exercise 330. Prove that sigma A plus lambda JH, under the same assumption, I want this as a corollary of this theorem, okay? Prove that these are increasing, or say non-decreasing, in in Jij and Hi. You can increase any Jij or increase any of the Hi, and this will never decrease the value of this expectation. So that's one possible interpretation of the second inequality, as you will see if you prove this result. Okay, so that's a useful exercise. So let's now turn to the FKG inequalities. 362. And for this, okay, you already saw a version of them for independent random variables and for percolation model. Let me state the corresponding inequalities for the Ising model. So I need a notion of order, the same you had in percolation. So I will say, so is there a number? Let me just check. No, it's okay. I will introduce a partial order on the set of configuration, omega. And we'll say that the configuration omega is smaller than the configuration omega tilde if and only if omega I is smaller than omega tilde I for all I. Okay? So I can order configuration. I mean, at least I have a partial order on configuration in this way. Coordinate-wise order. Okay, with this I can define notion of increasing function. So non-decreasing if omega smaller than omega tilde implies f of omega smaller than f of omega tilde. Okay. So I think with this I have everything I need to state the FKG inequality. Let me just give you before an exercise. Check that some functions are indeed non-decreasing. So check that sigma I, Ni, but also Na, which was the product over I in A of Ni, and even sum over I in A Ni minus Na, all these functions are non-decreasing. For all I in ZD, for all A, finite subsets of ZD. Okay, that's an exercise. It's not difficult, but check it. And then the theorem is as follows. Theorem is 332. So again, take a finite box, take an arbitrary boundary condition. Okay, can really be arbitrary. Some boundary condition. Assume, let J be an arbitrary collection of real numbers, no assumptions and non-negativity, so arbitrary collection of real numbers. And let H, okay, let me do it like that. G and H, oh sorry, I'm writing something stupid. Let me do it again. So let H be some arbitrary collection of real numbers. Arbitrary collection of real numbers. And J be a collection of non-negative real numbers. So for the magnetic fields, the sign is not important. You can do whatever you want, but for the coupling constant, you want them to be non-negative. And then under these assumptions, it's here. Under these assumptions, you have the following inequality. It tells you that increasing functions, f and j, are always positively correlated, the corresponding finite volume Gibbs distributions. So then, for all f and g local, we have that, so let me write it like that, expectation of fg, boundary condition, we said it was completely arbitrary or whatever, and then lambda j h, and this is always bigger than f j h g, lambda j h. Okay. That's fkg.
Don't we need non-decreasing instead of?
Sorry, non-local. Okay, yes, local non-decreasing. Okay, thank you. Actually, local is not very important at the moment because in any case, I'm looking only at what happens with the finite volume Gibbs measure. So what is outside lambda is just frozen. So any function is local in this sense under such measure. But okay. Okay, so that's what I want. So any non-decreasing function are positively correlated. These are the FKG inequalities. So these two inequalities, the JKS and FKG, I will not prove them for many good reasons. One is that the proofs are not particularly enlightening. The proofs are given in the notes in the end. They are very short. I mean, the proof for GKS is extremely short. It's less than a page, I would say. And it's very easy, but it's just a trick. It gives you what you want. The proof for FKG, I give you two in the book. There is a very short one. It's even shorter than the proof for GKS. And it's completely mysterious. It's very easy, completely general, but you don't understand I don't understand what happens. And then I give a second one, which is based on Markov chains, which is beautiful and a bit longer. I don't want to spend 1 hour explaining this. And last reason is that this will be proved with this proof on Markov chain. It will be proved in Hugo's course later. So you will see it, but we don't want to do it twice. And you will also see a proof of that in Hugo's lecture later, although the proof is more complicated than the one in the book, because it will be a consequence of geometric representation he will introduce. But you don't need this geometric representation, you can prove these two inequalities directly, it's a bit shorter. But you will see the proof of both claims in Hugo's course, so I don't want to do that here. Okay, rather than proving these things, I want to show what are consequences of these inequalities. So, consequences. So the first one, it's lemma 333. Let me keep this. Lemma 333. Let's take a non-decreasing function f. Let me write that for non-decreasing, right? I don't want to write it 10,000 times. And let's take two finite subsets of ZD, lambda 1 and lambda 2, with lambda 1 subset of lambda 2. Okay. Then, that's true for any beta and any h. I want that the expectation of f in the box lambda 1 with plus boundary condition is always larger than the expectation of f in the box lambda 2 plus boundary condition. So intuitively it should be pretty clear because f likes pluses. F is a non-decreasing function, so it takes larger value if you have more pluses around, right? Now, in this box, in the small box, the pluses which are in the boundary condition, they are much closer to the support of f than in the big box. Okay? So this boundary condition, they will have as an effect that there will be more pluses close to the support of f than under this measure, and therefore f should take in average larger values here than it takes here. Okay? So that's the content, intuitive content of this lemma. The proof is almost obvious. We just need one result, which either you have already done in exercises or you will do in exercises. It's a kind of Markov property, spatial Markov property for Gibbs measures, for Gibbs finite volume Gibbs distributions. follows immediately, almost immediately from the definition of the Gibbs distribution, is the following. So prove that for any delta subset of lambda, finite subset of ZD, okay, any boundary condition eta, and any configuration omega prime which agrees with this boundary condition in the box lambda. And before I write the statement, let me make a picture of what I want. I want the following. So we have, that's lambda, the big box lambda. Then we have a sub-box delta somewhere. Okay. And then what I want is the following. So outside the box lambda, we want to put these eta boundary conditions. Do it like that. So here we put some eta boundary condition outside the big box lambda, and then let me try to find another color. Now, in the set lambda minus delta, so in this intermediate set, I want to freeze the spin to condition on the fact that the spin take the value omega prime. So I'm looking at the measure in the big box with this boundary condition, looking at the measure in the big box. I'm forcing the conditioning on the fact that this configuration here in this orange part is given by omega prime, and I'm wondering what is the measure that I see inside the box delta, conditionally on the fact that I see omega prime on lambda minus delta. Okay? And the answer is that what you see is a Gibbs measure in delta with omega prime boundary condition. Okay? It's intuitively obvious, but you have to check that it indeed follows from the definition. So if I want to, have I stated it for expectation or for measures? It's the same, but just want to be consistent with what is done is in the book. So it's no, it's the measure itself. So let's look at the measure mu, eta, lambda, okay, beta h. I'm looking at the probability measure in the big box with eta boundary condition conditionally on the fact that the spin in lambda minus delta, it's given by this configuration omega prime. Then this is just the Gibbs measure in delta with boundary condition omega prime. Okay, that's what you have to prove. So with this, it's very easy to prove the lemma. It's a direct consequence of FKG. Proof of lemma whatever, 333. Okay. Well, let's do it. So we want to compute expectation of f with plus boundary condition in the box. So the smallest one was lambda 1, I guess. Yes, in the box lambda 1. Let me omit beta and h. They are fixed. Okay, I don't touch them, so I don't want to write them every time. So this I can write as the expectation of f. Let me do it like that. In the box lambda 2 with plus boundary condition, but conditionally on the fact that all the spins in in lambda 2 minus lambda 1 are given by plus 1. So sigma I equal plus 1 for all I in lambda 2 minus lambda 1. Okay, the picture is the same as before, of course. We have lambda 2, lambda 1, we have pluses outside. That's the plus boundary condition outside lambda 2. And then I'm conditioning all the spins there to be also pluses. Okay, and then here by the exercise, what I see here is exactly this measure. So that's just the same thing. Now this is f times the indicator function of sigma equal plus 1 for all I in lambda 2 minus lambda 1 plus lambda 2 divided by indicator that sigma I equal plus 1 for all I in lambda 2 minus lambda 1 plus lambda 2. Okay. Now the observation basic but important, is that, okay, by assumption f is non-decreasing, that's a non-decreasing function, but this indicator function also, so that's the indicator function that all the spins take value +1. So if you change a minus spin in a plus spin, the only thing that can happen is that this indicator goes from 0 to 1. So this is also non-decreasing. This is non-decreasing, so I can apply FKG inequality. And the expectation of the product will be bigger than the product of the expectation, so I get f plus lambda 2 times the indicator of this stuff plus lambda 2 divided by expectation of the indicator plus lambda 2. This cancels, and what remains is exactly what I want. Okay. The expectation of f in lambda 1 is larger than the expectation of f in lambda 2. Okay, so that's the first inequality we'll need. The second one, lemma 336. So if you remember, when I introduced the plus and minus boundary condition, I told you that these plus and minus boundary conditions are extremal in the sense that plus boundary condition maximally favors plus spins inside the box, and minus boundary condition maximally favors minus spins inside the box. So we'll give a precise meaning to that in this lemma. So lemma 336. So again, let f be an increasing function, lambda be a finite subset of ZD, so it's the same thing. Then, for any beta equal to 0, for any h in R, we have that, let me do it this way. So compute the expectation of this non-decreasing function f in lambda, beta h. This is always smaller than the expectation of f under this, say, some, let me do it like that. Some eta boundary condition, lambda beta h, smaller than f plus lambda beta h. For all eta and omega. Take any boundary condition, choose any boundary condition. So if you take the plus boundary condition, you compute the expectation of a non-decreasing function, you get the maximal value possible for the expectation. Take the minus boundary condition and get the minimal value, and everything else is in between. Okay? So that's something that will be very useful to us. The proof is, again, an elementary application of FKG. So let's do it. F lambda plus. Again, I omit the beta and h, and I will only prove this inequality. This one is proved in the same way, of course, okay? By symmetry. I'll prove the first one, the top one. So this is what? Let me write things completely explicitly. So that's the sum over all omega in omega lambda plus f of omega e minus h lambda of omega divided by the sum over omega in omega lambda plus e minus h lambda of omega. That's just definition of the expectation under this measure. Good. Now I want to rewrite the denominator and numerator in a way that is useful to me. Maybe I'll do it on the next board. Okay, so let's take the denominator, it's slightly simpler. Sum over all omega in omega lambda plus, so all configuration which take plus value outside the box lambda, e minus h lambda omega. Okay. And I would like to go from this measure with plus boundary condition to the measure with eta boundary condition. So I would like to replace this by a sum over all omega in omega lambda eta, so configuration which agree with the boundary condition eta outside the box lambda, e minus h lambda of omega. And then, of course, this identity is not an identity, it's wrong, but I can correct for the error I'm making. So if you look at what is the difference between these two Hamiltonian here, they only differ by a boundary term, because here the spins are interacting with pluses outside the box, while here they are interacting with eta spins outside the box. Okay, so I can correct this by multiplying by the sum over all, let me write it, I in lambda, j not in lambda, I and j neighbors. Okay, looking at nearest neighbor spin, so that's my box lambda, that's the boundary of lambda. So I'm looking at these interactions here. Okay, and in this measure, I have plus spins. In the other measure, I have eta spins outside. I have to take this into account. So I have to add, so I will get omega I 1 minus eta j. Let you check. So the sum of omega I times 1 is exactly the contribution I have in this Hamiltonian. And this minus the sum of omega I eta j is exactly what I need to cancel the boundary term in this Hamiltonian. Okay, so that I replace the eta by plus. Now this I will give it a name. So let's call this function I of omega. It's just some function of omega, okay, which is a nice function. Why is it a nice function? It's a nice function because 1 minus eta j, it's something which is always larger or equal to 0. Okay, eta j is plus or minus 1. So this is larger or equal to 0. So I get exponential of a sum of omega I times some positive number. This is non-decreasing. I of omega is a non-decreasing function. This will be useful for us. Okay. So this is for the denominator. I can do that. Now let me do something similar for the numerator. Omega lambda plus f of omega e minus h lambda of omega. This is, so I do exactly the same trick. Omega lambda eta e minus h, okay, let me do it like that. E minus h lambda of omega. I get this I of omega which corrects the error I'm making. And then I would like to put f of omega here. But if I put f of omega, I have to be careful. F is not necessarily, the support of f is not necessarily inside the box lambda. It could also, f could have a support which do something like that. For example, this could be the support of f. So when I replace the plus spins by eta spins, I'm decreasing the value of the configuration here, so the value of f can decrease. F is a non-decreasing function, so if I decrease the value of the spin, f decreases. So this is an inequality. Okay. Okay. Because I'm lowering the value of the spins in this region. Okay. So now if I put all this here, I get that this is larger than sum over omega in omega lambda eta, f of omega, e minus h lambda of omega, I of omega, divided by the sum over omega in omega lambda eta, e minus h lambda of omega, I of omega. Okay. And now I'm almost done because what I can do is I can divide on the numerator in the numerator and the denominator by the corresponding partition function, z lambda eta, and what I get in the numerator is the expectation under the Gibbs distribution in the box lambda with eta boundary condition of the function fi. So that's expectation of fi eta lambda. And the denominator, I get the expectation of the function I eta lambda. Okay? But then again, as before, f is non-decreasing, I is non-decreasing. So by fkg, this is bigger than the product of the expectation of f with the expectation of I. So the expectation of I in the numerator and denominator cancel, and I'm left with the expectation of f eta lambda, which is exactly what I want. So the expectation of f eta lambda is smaller than the expectation of f in the with express boundary condition. Okay, so that's the proof of the second of these inequalities. You see that these correlation inequalities are very useful. To obtain qualitative properties of these Gibbs distributions. Let me erase that. So now I have all I need to prove this theorem, 325 or something like that, about the existence of the plus and minus states and translation invariance of the plus and minus states. So I will do that now. So let me just check that it's indeed 325. Yes, it seems to be. So proof of theorem 325. So let's fix some non-decreasing function f. Okay, infinite. Okay, let me take some lambda n, which increase to ZD. I want to show that the limit of the expectation of f under lambda n with plus boundary condition, the box lambda n with plus boundary condition, it converges to something. Okay. So now what I will use is I will first use this lemma, the one on the decomposition in terms of the sigma of the NA. So it's lemma 328. Let me take this paper. Lemma 328. This one implies that f is equal to the sum over A in the support of f of some f tilde, some coefficient f tilde A and A. Okay. So in particular, the expectation of f plus lambda n is just by linearity of expectation equal to this linear combination of the expectation of the NA. That's why it's so useful to have such a decomposition, because now I can concentrate on just this. And what is the big advantage? That f is just a local function with no particular properties, but these ones are local functions which are increasing by exercise whatever that I gave you earlier. Okay? So this is an increasing function, so I can use what we just showed earlier, the monotonicity in the volume. I don't know if it's still somewhere, I don't think so. But it was lemma 33, I think. If not, you will change it. Tells you that, so NA is increasing, so the expectation of NA plus lambda n plus 1 is smaller than NA plus lambda n. Okay? It's decreasing with the volume, the expectation. Moreover, obviously, these guys are all non-negative because NA takes value 0 or 1. Okay? So you have a decreasing sequence, bounded decreasing sequence, it's converging. Okay? So limit, let me write it like that, NA plus, which is the limit n to infinity of NA plus lambda n exists. Okay? But that means that if this guy exists, and then you have proven convergence for all local functions. Okay, so that's, for convergence, it's really an immediate consequence of what we have done. Now, I want to prove that the limits are translation invariant. Oh, one thing. No, there is one thing I still need to do. I have proven that if you fix a sequence lambda n, then, okay, but it's kind of, okay. If you fix a sequence lambda n, then you construct some set, some limit, some state, some limiting state. I still have not proven that it's independent of the sequence. Maybe if I was taking now a sequence delta n, going to ZD, I would construct a new state here, and therefore here, and that's not what I want. I want to construct always the same. So I still have to prove that the limit is independent of the sequence of boxes, but that's very, very easy to see. Let me do that now. And we'll prove translation invariance afterwards. Okay, so that was existence, 1. 2, independence of the choice of lambda going to ZD. So to prove it, we'll take two different such things. So lambda 1n, which goes to ZD, and lambda 2n, which goes to ZD, both increase to ZD. I want to show that the states I construct for these two in point 1 are the same. So the way to do it is to construct a third sequence of sets. So set delta 1 to be lambda 1, 1. Okay. And delta 2k, this will be, so that's the definition, delta 2k will be the intersection, and I will explain the idea, it's very simple, lambda 2 n such that, okay, intersect lambda 2n contains delta 1, and then delta 2k plus 1. It's a complicated way of writing something completely trivial, but I will say it in a second what it means. Lambda n1 is, delta 2k minus 1, and delta 2k. So what I'm doing is the following. So I have these two sequences of boxes. So I have that's lambda 1, 1, lambda 1, 2, lambda 1, 3, lambda 1, 4, and then I have another sequence. Lambda 2, 1, lambda 2, 2, lambda 2, 3, and so on. Okay? So what I'm doing is I'm taking the first lambda 1, 1, this will be delta 1. Okay? Then I'm looking at the smallest members of the second sequence of sets, which contains this guy. So here it would be lambda 2, 3. So this guy here, it will be delta 2. Okay? And then I will look at the first member of the first sequence of sets, which contains delta 2. So it will be this guy, because it contains. Okay? That would be delta 3. And you go on like that. So each delta with an odd indices, with an odd index, is a subset in this sequence, and each one with with an even index is a subset in this sequence. Okay, so I'm alternating between members of this sequence, members of this sequence, in such a way that delta is increasing. So what we know, let me write it down. So by construction, I have that delta k is included in delta k plus 1 for all k. I have that the delta 2k plus 1 are included in the sequence lambda 1 n, and the delta k, it's an element of this sequence, and the delta 2k is an element of the sequence lambda 2 n. Okay? So that's what we know. So in particular, it's going to, let's use this first. So 1, 2, 3. So 1 implies by point 1 that we did earlier, the delta are a sequence of subsets of ZD which converges, which increases to ZD. So I have some limit associated to it. So the limit n goes to infinity f plus delta n exists. Okay. And actually the same is true also for lambda 1 and it's the same also for lambda 2n. They all exist, these limits, by point 1. Okay. The point is whether they coincide. Now, obviously the limit n to infinity of f plus lambda 1n has to agree with the limit n to infinity f plus delta n. Why? Because if this limit exists, that means that all its subsequents converge to the same limit. And if I take the subsequents along the odd indices, okay, this is just a subsequence of this one. So they cannot converge to different limits if the limit exists. So by point 2, these two have to agree, and by point 3, this has to agree with f plus lambda 2n, or 2n if you want. Okay. Doesn't matter. Oh no, 2n here. Okay, so therefore this guy and this guy coincide everywhere, and therefore the limit does not depend on the volume. Okay, so that proves the independence of lambda, and the only thing that remains to be done, I've just on time. So the only thing that remains to be done is the translation invariance of these states. Let's do that. So 3, translation invariance. I will do it for plus. The same is true for minus in the same way. Okay. So let f be a increasing local function. Okay. Then let lambda be a finite subset of ZD. Let J be a point in ZD. Okay. And let me make a picture. I want to consider two things. So I have, say, lambda n, rather a sequence is better. So I have lambda n, my sequence which grows to ZD. Okay. Somewhere I have the support of f. That's the support of f. F is a local. All the times they are local, my function. Here I've not said it, but of course here it's obvious that I need it. So okay. I have a local function f. Support is somewhere here. When n is large enough, so certainly I have a picture of this type. And now I want to consider a translation by J. So what I will do is that I will consider a set here, which is theta minus j lambda n. So it's the translation of all vertices in lambda n by minus j. So I'm bringing things here. So if okay. This is j. Picture is not very good, but pretty clear. This function here, I can associate to it a function which has a support which is translated by minus j. That's the support of the function f composed with theta j. Okay. And then I apply point 1. So what we know is that f composed with theta j is still a local function. Okay, I've not just translated its support, but support is still a bounded set. So it's still a local function. I have that the set theta minus j lambda n, this sequence here, let me do it like that. This sequence theta minus j lambda n, it's still increasing to ZD because the sequence lambda n was increasing to ZD. I have just moved the origin, but otherwise doesn't change anything. It's still converging to ZD. Okay, so that we know. So by point 1, it implies two things. First, I have that the state, I mean the Gibbs distribution with plus boundary condition in the box lambda n, say, let's say expectation of f with plus boundary condition in the box lambda n, it converges to f plus, expectation of f under the plus state. But I also have that this local function, that's a local function, under this particular sequence of subsets which converge, which increase to ZD here, it's also converging to the expectation of the local function under the plus state. Okay, that's point 1. I can take any local function, so f or f composed with theta j, they are both local functions, so I can apply the point 1 to both. Okay, and to any sequence of increasing sequence of sets, so I can take either lambda n or theta minus j lambda n, doesn't change anything. I get the same limiting state in the end, so I get this. And now the conclusion is very easy, because if you look at the picture which is here obviously, if I look at the expectation of f in the box lambda n with plus boundary condition, or I look at the expectation of f composed with theta j in the box theta minus j lambda n with plus boundary condition, I just get exactly the same. There is no difference. I mean, I'm just changing the labeling of the vertices, but it's exactly the same. So these things are equal for all n. So the limit must be equal. So that shows that the expectation of f and the expectation of f composed with the translation are always equal. And that finishes the proof. Maybe I won't start something else today. So are there questions about what we have seen today? I see people who are not convinced by something. Should ask questions. Okay? No question for today? Good? See you next week.